John Brown's trial and execution occurred roughly 1 year before the presidential election of 1860, and the episode only intensified Southern commitment to the expansion of slavery. In the aftermath of the raid, the Southern wing of the Democratic Party made clear that it would not support any presidential nominee who failed to fully endorse the Dred Scott versus Sandford decision, which declared congressional restrictions on slavery's expansion into the territories unconstitutional. In 1858, Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois declined to fully endorse the Dred Scott decision during his re-election campaign against Abraham Lincoln. During one of their 7 debates, Douglas argued that the residents of a territory should decide for themselves whether slavery would be permitted, a position later known as the Freeport Doctrine. Douglas won re-election, but his stance on territorial slavery would have significant consequences 2 years later. In 1860, the Democratic Party initially nominated Douglas for president. Southern Democrats, however, walked out of the convention and nominated their own candidate, Vice President John C. Breckinridge. Running on a platform that fully endorsed the Dred Scott decision and the protection of slavery in the territories, Breckinridge represented the uncompromising Southern position. The Democratic Party was now divided, a disastrous situation for any party hoping to win a presidential election. The Republicans ultimately nominated Abraham Lincoln. Although he was not the frontrunner when the Republican convention met, Lincoln emerged as a compromise candidate. On slavery, he was more moderate than many of his rivals. While he opposed the expansion of slavery into the territories, others in the party were willing to go much further. Lincoln's moderation made him the least controversial candidate capable of uniting the North. Southerners, however, viewed Lincoln as a nightmare. Southern newspapers published misleading stories about him, frequently misspelling his name and equating him with radical abolitionists such as John Brown. During the election campaign, events in Texas further intensified Southern paranoia. In July 1860, a series of fires broke out in North Texas, particularly in Denton, Pilot Point, and Dallas. With temperatures reaching nearly 110 degrees, investigators later determined that matches containing white phosphorus could spontaneously ignite. Before that explanation gained traction, conspiracy theories flourished. In the climate created by John Brown's raid, many Texans blamed abolitionists, believing the fires were part of a larger plot against slaveholders. Vigilante groups and mobs began targeting individuals suspected of participating in the alleged conspiracy. This wave of hysteria, known as the Texas Troubles, resulted in the deaths of dozens of enslaved people and suspected abolitionists. The election of 1860 featured a 4th candidate with a potential Texas connection. White Southerners in the Upper South nominated John Bell, a former senator, Secretary of War, and Speaker of the House, as the candidate of the Constitutional Union Party. At one point, Sam Houston, then governor of Texas, was considered for the nomination before Bell was selected. Supporters of the party hoped that the presence of an additional candidate would prevent any one contender, especially Lincoln, from securing an electoral majority, thereby throwing the election into the House of Representatives. The election did not unfold as Southern leaders had hoped. Unlike today, presidential elections did not coincide with down-ballot races. As Election Day approached, Republicans were sweeping the North in congressional and senatorial contests, giving them majorities in both houses of Congress. No northern state elected Democratic senators. Despite efforts to deny Lincoln an electoral majority, he carried nearly every northern state, with New Jersey splitting its electoral votes between Lincoln and Douglas. Lincoln did not appear on the ballot in many southern states. Of the slave states, he received popular votes only in Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, and Delaware. Ultimately, Lincoln won 59% of the electoral vote, while receiving only 40% of the popular. Breckinridge swept the Deep South, including Texas, where he received approximately 75% of the vote and carried all but 3 counties. Bell carried Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, while Douglas won only Missouri and half of New Jersey's electoral votes. Following the election, the South faced a choice: remain in the Union or secede. Even before the election, South Carolina had declared that it would leave the Union if Lincoln were elected. On December 20, 1860, it fulfilled that threat. Within a month, 4 additional Deep South states followed. By mid-January 1861, only Texas and Louisiana remained in the Union. Louisiana seceded on January 26. Texas's secession process began immediately after Lincoln's election, though it proceeded more slowly due to Governor Sam Houston. As a leading advocate of Texas's annexation to the United States, Houston urged caution. He advised Texans to wait and see whether Lincoln would violate the Constitution and hoped passions would cool. His efforts ultimately delayed, but did not prevent secession. On December 3rd, secessionists announced plans for a convention to meet on January 28th. Houston responded by calling a special session of the state legislature on January 21st in an attempt to block the convention. Instead, the legislature approved it, though it agreed to Houston's demand that any action taken by the convention be ratified by the voters. When the convention met, 91% of its 177 delegates were Southern-born, and 72% were slaveholders. They elected Orrin M. Roberts as president and quickly made clear their intent to secede. The secession ordinance argued that the federal government had failed to protect Texans from Native American attacks and accused Northern politicians and abolitionists of outrages against the state. Above all, it defended slavery, claiming it was the only means of maintaining African Americans in what the delegates described as a beneficial or tolerable condition. The ordinance passed overwhelmingly, 166-8. The ordinance was submitted to voters on February 23rd. Although pockets of unionism remained, particularly in counties north of Dallas and in the Texas Hill Country, support for secession prevailed. Texans voted 44,317 to 13,020 in favor of leaving the Union. With popular approval secured, Texas formally joined the Confederacy on March 14th. The convention required all state officials to swear loyalty to the Confederacy. Sam Houston refused. Ordered to appear before the convention on March 16th, he remained in the building but declined to present himself. As a result, the convention declared the governorship vacant and elevated Lieutenant Governor Edward Clark. Despite refusing to swear allegiance, Houston later expressed verbal support for the Southern cause. He moved his family to Huntsville, where he died of pneumonia on July 26, 1863.